October 17th, 1929. 6:47 a.m. Officer Henry Blanc finds a man stumbling along Highland Boulevard in Staten Island, face covered in blood, throat slashed, body stabbed 11 times. The victim refuses to name his attackers. When pressed, he says only 4 words that will echo through mob history. "I'll handle it myself." What Charles Luciano did in the 72 hours after that near-fatal beating didn't just save his life. It rewrote the rules of organized crime. And when you hear how he sat across from the man who ordered his murder, calmly eating eggs and toast while that man's hands trembled, you'll understand why they called him Lucky. But not for the reasons you think. To understand what happened that October morning, you need to understand the war that was tearing New York apart. 1929. The Castellammares War. 2 Sicilian bosses, Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, were carving up Manhattan in a blood-soaked power struggle that would claim 60 men before it ended. Caught in the middle was a 33-year-old Sicilian immigrant named Charles Lucania, soon to be known as Lucky Luciano, who worked under Masseria but was already thinking 10 moves ahead. Luciano wasn't like the old mustache Petes who clung to Sicilian traditions and refused to work with Jews and Irish. He'd built relationships with Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, partnerships that made him money, but also made him dangerous to the old guard. To Masseria, Luciano was a valuable earner. To Maranzano, he represented everything wrong with the new generation. Both bosses wanted Luciano on their side. Neither could afford to let him survive on his own terms. In this environment, loyalty was purchased daily and betrayal was currency. Every handshake could be prelude to murder. Every meal could be your last. Luciano understood this better than most, which made what happened on October 16th even more shocking. Because the man who set him up wasn't an enemy. He was someone Luciano had broken bread with a dozen times. Someone who smiled while planning his death. Someone who thought he understood how the game was played. He didn't. October 16th, 1929, 10:35 p.m. Luciano stood on the corner of 50th Street and 6th Avenue in Manhattan, cigar smoke curling into the autumn air. He'd gotten a call from a woman, or someone claiming to be one, asking to meet. The voice was familiar enough. The location was public enough. Nothing raised alarm. Then the sedan pulled up. 3 men inside. One Luciano recognized. "Charlie, get in. Quick word about the Masseria situation." The door opened. Luciano saw the gun too late. They shoved him onto the floor, and adhesive tape went across his mouth before he could shout. His hands were bound with wire that bit into his wrists. The car lurched forward. Through the window, Luciano watched Manhattan disappear, replaced by the industrial wasteland of Staten Island. He knew what "take for a ride" meant. He'd helped coin the phrase. Nobody who got taken for a ride came back. The 3 men said nothing as they drove, which somehow made it worse than if they'd gloated. This wasn't personal. This was business. After 40 minutes, the car stopped on a desolate stretch near Huguenot Beach. They dragged Luciano out and threw him onto the sand. "Maranzano sends his regards," one of them finally said. Then the beating started. They used brass knuckles first. 3 men taking turns, methodical, professional. Luciano's ribs cracked. His jaw dislocated. Blood filled his mouth as he bit through his tongue. He tried to curl into a defensive position, but they kicked him flat. "Stay down, Charlie. Make it easier." He didn't. When Luciano tried to stand, they switched to knives. The first slash opened his right cheek from ear to jawline, severing the muscle. The blade was sharp enough that he barely felt it at first, just sudden warmth as blood poured down his neck. The second cut went across his throat, not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to send a message. They stabbed him in the back. Once, twice, 7 times total between his shoulder blades, each puncture designed to hurt but miss vital organs. This wasn't murder. This was a statement. They wanted him to know who held the power. They wanted him to understand his place. Then something unexpected happened. Luciano, bleeding out on Staten Island sand, started laughing. Not hysteria, cold, genuine amusement. "That all you got?" he choked out through the tape. One of the men ripped the tape off. "You got something to say before you die?" "Yeah," Luciano rasped. "You just made the biggest mistake of your lives." They didn't like that. They beat him until he lost consciousness, then dumped him in the dunes like garbage. The 3 men climbed back into the sedan, confident they'd never see Charles Lucania again. They drove back to Manhattan to collect their payment from Maranzano's people. They went home. They slept. And that's when Luciano's plan began. 6:47 a.m., October 17th. Officer Blanque found him. By 8 a.m., Luciano was in Richmond Memorial Hospital, where doctors counted 11 stab wounds, multiple lacerations, 3 cracked ribs, and a partially severed facial muscle that would leave his right eye drooping permanently. They asked if he could identify his attackers. "No," Luciano said. They asked who would want him dead. "No idea." They asked if he wanted police protection. "I'll handle it myself." The police didn't believe him, but they couldn't force him to talk. What they didn't know was that Luciano had already identified all 3 men from the car. He knew exactly who sent them. And by 10 a.m., despite being barely able to walk, he'd gotten a message out through Meyer Lansky to 5 key people in the organization. The message wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't a call for revenge. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a single question. Does Maranzano know what Masseria will do when he finds out? That one question started a fire that would burn through the New York underworld. Because Luciano understood something his attackers didn't. In a war between 2 bosses, everyone was paranoid. Everyone was looking for betrayal. And the man who controlled information controlled everything. While he lay in that hospital bed, his face a swollen mess, Luciano set in motion a plan that wouldn't end with bullets. It would end with breakfast. 3 days after the attack, Luciano walked out of Richmond Memorial Hospital against doctor's orders. His face looked like raw meat, stitches running from ear to chin, eye drooping grotesquely. He could barely turn his head. Every breath sent lightning through his ribs. But he was alive, and that sent a shockwave through every speakeasy and social club in Manhattan. Word spread fast. Charlie Lucky survived a professional hit. That alone changed everything, because in the underworld, survival meant power. It meant you were either too smart to kill or too dangerous to finish off. Luciano let the rumors build for 2 days. He stayed hidden in a safe house in Brooklyn, meeting with Lansky, Frank Costello, and Vito Genovese. They wanted blood. They wanted to find the 3 men and make an example. "No," Luciano told them, his voice a rasp from the throat wound. "That's what they expect. That's what old-school Sicilians do. We're going to do something different." "What?" Genovese asked. "Psychology." Luciano explained his plan. It was bold to the point of insanity. It required perfect timing and absolute nerve. But if it worked, it would accomplish something no amount of violence could. It would make Salvatore Maranzano fear him. Because Maranzano had ordered a hit and failed. That made him look weak. But it also made him nervous. He'd be waiting for retaliation, every shadow a potential assassin. Instead, Luciano would give him something far more terrifying. Proof that he couldn't be intimidated. Proof that the rules had changed. On October 22nd, 5 days after being left for dead, Luciano put on his best suit, wrapped gauze around his neck to hide the stitches, and walked into Delmonico's restaurant on Fifth Avenue. Sitting at a corner table was Marco Reina, one of Maranzano's top lieutenants, one of the men who'd been in the car. And Luciano sat down right across from him. Marco Reina's face went white. The fork in his hand clattered onto the plate. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. The restaurant buzzed with the usual morning chatter, oblivious to the fact that a dead man had just sat down at table 7. "Morning, Marco," Luciano said casually, like they'd planned this. "Mind if I join you?" Reina's hand moved toward his jacket, toward the gun Luciano knew would be there, but stopped halfway. Because this was a public place, a restaurant full of witnesses, and Luciano wasn't armed. He spread his hands on the table, showing he had nothing. "Relax, I'm just here for breakfast." Reina found his voice. "Charlie, Jesus Christ, how are you? Alive?" Luciano finished. "Yeah, funny thing about that. Turns out your boys didn't finish the job." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Luciano signaled the waiter. "Coffee, black, and the eggs, scrambled." "You want anything else, Marco?" "My treat." Reina stared at him like he was hallucinating. His mind was racing through possibilities. Was this a setup? Were Luciano's people surrounding the building? Was this the moment before a bloodbath? But nothing happened. The waiter brought coffee. Luciano stirred in sugar with his scarred hand, the one that still had wire marks around the wrist. "I've been thinking," Luciano said conversationally, "about loyalty, about who owes what to who, about how information travels in our world. Charlie, listen." "No, you listen." Luciano's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Reina shut his mouth. "You and your friends made a decision 5 nights ago. You thought you were following orders. You thought you were doing what was smart. But you didn't think about what happens next." Luciano leaned forward. The movement pulled at his stitches, but he didn't flinch. "Here's what happens next, Marco. You go back to Maranzano. You tell him exactly what you saw here. You tell him I'm not hiding. I'm not scared. I'm having eggs at Delmonico's like nothing happened. You tell him that." "And what's that supposed to prove?" "It proves that I know who ordered the hit. It proves I know who carried it out. And it proves I'm choosing not to retaliate." Reina's confusion was visible. "Why?" "Because retaliation is predictable. Retaliation is what old men do when they can't think of anything smarter. I'm doing something different. I'm sending a message to your boss that he's not fighting the enemy he thinks he's fighting." The eggs arrived. Luciano ate slowly, methodically, maintaining eye contact with Reina the entire time. Every bite was a statement. I survived. I'm not afraid, and I'm in control of this situation. "You're insane," Reina finally said. "Maybe, but I'm alive, and your reputation is about to get very complicated." "What does that mean?" "It means," Luciano said, pushing his empty plate away, "that everyone in our world is going to hear about this breakfast. They're going to hear that the man who tried to kill me is sitting across from me, sweating while I eat eggs. They're going to ask themselves, why isn't Luciano dead? And more importantly, why isn't he killing the men who tried? And when they ask those questions, Marco, they're going to realize something." "What?" "That I'm playing a different game than Masseria or Maranzano. And that game doesn't end with you or your friends dead. It ends with them irrelevant." Luciano stood up. dropped cash on the table for both meals, and buttoned his coat. "Enjoy your breakfast, Marco. Tell your boss I said hello, and tell him we should talk soon. Because this war, it's bad for business, and I'm about to end it." Luciano walked out of Delmonico's into the October morning. He didn't look back. He didn't rush. He simply left Marco Reyna sitting there, food untouched, mind reeling. And just like Luciano predicted, the story spread like wildfire. By that afternoon, every wise guy from Mulberry Street to Hell's Kitchen had heard about it. The details got embellished with each retelling, but the core remained. Lucky Luciano sat down with one of the men who tried to kill him and made him afraid. Not with violence, with presence, with the sheer audacity of showing up, unmarked and unafraid, in the light of day. That evening, Salvatore Maranzano received a visit from 3 of his captains, Marco Reyna among them. They told him what happened. Maranzano, a calculating strategist who prided himself on reading men, realized he'd made a critical error. He'd tried to eliminate a rival and instead created a legend. The hit was supposed to remove a problem. Instead, it advertised that Luciano was unkillable. Worse, Luciano's refusal to retaliate immediately created doubt. Was he planning something bigger? Did he have leverage Maranzano didn't know about? Was he already negotiating with Masseria? The uncertainty was corrosive. For the first time since the war began, Maranzano felt off balance. 3 weeks later, representatives from Luciano's crew reached out to Maranzano with a message. Luciano wanted to meet. Alone. No weapons. Public place. Maranzano, intrigued despite himself, agreed. They met at a social club in East Harlem. And in that meeting, Luciano laid out a vision that would change organized crime forever. He explained that the war between Sicilian old-timers was destroying profit for everyone. He proposed a structure, a commission, where the families could resolve disputes without bloodshed. He suggested that business, not ego, should drive decisions. And then he made his pitch. "You want to kill Masseria? I'll help you. But after that, we do things different. No more boss of bosses, no more old country rules. We modernize." Maranzano listened. He saw the logic, and 6 months later, on April 15th, 1931, Joe Masseria was shot to death in a Coney Island restaurant while Luciano was conveniently in the bathroom. Maranzano took control for 5 months. Then, on September 10th, 1931, Luciano's people walked into Maranzano's office and killed him too. Because Lucky Luciano had learned the lesson that breakfast at Delmonico's taught him. Power isn't about who can inflict the most violence. It's about who can think furthest ahead. The story of the October 17th beating became legend within days. Newspapers ran headlines about the gangster who wouldn't die. The drooping eye and facial scar became Lucky Luciano's trademark, more recognizable than any mugshot. But it wasn't just about survival. It was about what the survival represented. Every wise guy who heard the story understood the subtext. Luciano had been given a death sentence and turned it into a business opportunity. He'd transformed an assassination attempt into psychological warfare, and he'd done it with a cup of coffee and scrambled eggs. Over the next decade, Luciano built the commission, established the 5 families of New York, and created the blueprint for modern organized crime. He eliminated the dictatorial boss of bosses model and replaced it with a corporate structure where disputes were resolved through negotiation. When World War II came, he allegedly cut deals with naval intelligence to protect the waterfronts. When he was finally imprisoned and deported, he ran operations from Italy. But it all started with that breakfast, with the decision to sit across from an enemy and smile instead of shoot. with the understanding that intimidation is more powerful when it's subtle. The three men who attacked Luciano that October night, two of them disappeared within a year, their bodies never found. The third, Marco Reyna, became one of Luciano's most reliable informants, eventually helping him consolidate power. Because after that morning at Delmonico's, Reyna understood what everyone would eventually learn. Lucky Luciano wasn't lucky. He was smarter than everyone else. And if you were smart too, you worked for him instead of against him. Because Lucky Luciano understood something most gangsters never learn. Fear isn't about how much damage you can inflict. It's about how much control you can demonstrate. Anyone can pull a trigger. Any thug can beat a man half to death. But it takes a special kind of intelligence to survive a murder attempt. And then sit down for breakfast with your attempted killer, making him realize that you're not playing the same game he is. It's not about revenge. It's about dominance. It's about showing that you operate on a different level, that you see angles others miss, that you turn vulnerability into strength. The old Sicilian bosses thought power came from being the most vicious. Luciano proved it came from being the most unpredictable, from making your enemies question their assumptions, from walking into a situation where you should be the victim and walking out being the one everyone fears. That breakfast at Delmonico's lasted maybe 20 minutes, but its impact rippled through organized crime for generations. It established Luciano not just as a survivor, but as someone who rewrote the rules in real time. Someone who understood that the real war wasn't fought with guns. It was fought in the space between what people expected and what actually happened. October 17th, 1929. A beaten man left for dead on Staten Island survived and built an empire. But he didn't do it by being the toughest. He did it by being the smartest, by understanding that showing up and eating eggs could be more intimidating than any bullet. If this story showed you that real power is about psychology, not violence, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories about the strategic minds who built the underworld empires, not just the shooters who filled the body count. Drop a comment. Would you have the nerve to sit across from someone who tried to kill you? Or would you have gone straight for revenge? Because that choice defines who runs the game and who gets played by it. Turn on notifications because next week we're diving into the most brilliant double-cross in mob history. The moment Meyer Lansky set up his closest friend, watched him die, and made it look like business as usual. The betrayal that nobody saw coming. Remember, in the real underworld, the man who survives isn't the one who hits hardest. He's the one who makes his enemies doubt everything they thought they knew. And Lucky Luciano? He made doubt his weapon of choice.